Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 172 and I am the show's host Kyle. On this episode of Foreign Policy Focus, I'm going to be discussing Trump's announcement that John Bolton will be the new National Security Advisor to the United States. The NSA is a very important position in the president's administration and really sets a lot of tone and influence when it comes to foreign policy. And so I'm going to kind of break down what this all means and, who John Bolton is and how bad it is that he's the new NSA. So if you want to share the show, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or libertarianinstitute.org. So John Bolton is a longtime, unapologetic war hawk. He was in the Reagan administration, was I believe his first political appointment. He was in the Justice Department and then was in the State Department under the H.W. Bush administration. Bolton is now in his late 60s and is a Yale grad. He has spent a lot of time at AEI. Under the Bush administration, his first political office was Undersecretary of State of Arms Control and International Security Affairs. We'll get into it later in the show, but in this role, he played an important role in the lead up to the Iraq War and lying America into it. And then in 05 to 06, he was made a recess appointment as U.S. Ambassador to the UN in August of 05. And held that position till he had to resign December 31st, 2006, because it was obvious that the Senate wasn't going to confirm his nomination to that position. After leaving the UN and, not having a political appointment, definitely during the Obama administration, as Bolton is one of those Republican war hawks and not one of those Democrat war hawks, has spent time at AEI and then is frequent on Fox News. Bolton gets a lot of titles, whether it be a neocon or a nationalist or a war hawk or somewhat of a Cheneyite. For John Bolton's take, at least, he says that he is not a neocon. And the reason he gives for this is typically that he doesn't care about inserting democracy after. He says, well, if you're going to be a neocon, you have to go out there and not only say that we should topple the dictator, but should stay after and make sure they adopt a democracy. Bolton's, I think, stance would be that he only cares about the national security of the American people and come what may to the people of the rest of the world, so long as they don't present a threat to America. I think John Bolton has described himself in the past of being something of a conservative libertarian, although I don't think this title really applies. I think most conservatives and all libertarians reject him pretty much offhand as a libertarian. I've never heard another libertarian actually voice support for John Bolton. And so, I don't mind the neocon title for John Bolton. I don't really care what he says. It seems more or less correct to me, but, he's just an unbridled absolute war hawk. Now, Trump announced this change in a tweet. He tweeted out that on 4/9, so April 9th, Bolton would be assuming the position and McMaster would be leaving the position. McMaster has since announced that he will be retiring this summer. Some of the significance to McMaster is that apparently McMaster and Trump have never gotten along. I've heard reports that John Bolton explains things in a way that Trump enjoys, and McMaster expects Trump to sit through these long, detailed briefings that he doesn't have the attention span for. I don't know. Whether that's true or not, it can be hard to say. I know a lot of people have so much bias against Trump that they tend to report these things, I think, without too much criticism of if it's actually true or if it made sense. But at the same time, on these national security and foreign policy issues, there's a lot of nuance. It's very in-depth. No matter what action you take, there's going to be a lot of consequences and potential consequences. And so I don't think it would be uncommon if Trump would have trouble keeping his attention with it. I know that, I'm always looking to talk to people about the foreign policy stuff. Surprise, surprise. And most people I encounter and I start talking to them about this, by like my third or fourth sentence, you tell that they, they've drifted off and, they can't conceptualize Syria and Yemen and Saudi Arabia on a map. And so why, even pay attention to the thing? One interesting thing to note is that in the Army, the highest rank would be a 4-star general. McMaster at this time is a 3-star general. So there's a lot of speculation that even if McMaster got fired, he would go on to get his 4th star, possibly by given a quote-unquote promotion to be U.S. Commander of Troops in Afghanistan, replacing General Nicholson, who's been there for quite a long time now. But McMaster is not going to Afghanistan, which means he's going to retire without getting his 4th star, which I think in some ways is seen as almost, like getting a brown belt, but not getting your black belt, right? Like that's the top line or top as far as you could go, as far as it goes, with the army and getting stars and ranks and promotions and stuff like that. And so it probably would have been a big deal for him to get that. So I guess there's a possibility that Trump didn't offer him a job and didn't give him a path to getting his 4th star. Maybe that Trump had some resentment against McMaster and pursued it against him. We've seen in the past that people that Trump doesn't like, whether it be McCabe, the former FBI number 2, or Comey, the former head of the FBI, who are both fired in somewhat, less than professional and rude ways, seeming to be, Trump sending a somewhat vindictive and petty message against these men. Or it could have been McMaster saying that as much as I want the 4th star, I'm not going to have my record and legacy be stained with the defeat and coming loss of the Afghan war. So this could be a sign that things in Afghanistan are going very poorly, that even McMaster, who, wrote the book on Vietnam saying that all we had to do is do it better, saying that there's no way we could do it in Afghanistan. All right, but let's not jerk too far away from John Bolton, because that's who this podcast is about. If we rewind back to the Bush administration, which is really where John Bolton, I think, cuts his teeth and gets his reputation, he starts moving up here. There's a lot of reporting that during this time, from 01 to 05, that while John Bolton worked for the State Department, he was really working for Dick Cheney and was one of Cheney's men and would do a lot of things that were either outside the realm of his position or were off the radar from the leadership of the State Department. So for those of you who can remember back to the days of the Iraq War and the lies being told to get America into the Iraq War, Colin Powell was one of the few that was somewhat skeptical on some of this stuff, but John Bolton kind of undermined him and went around him in order to help lie America into the wars. Not that Colin Powell didn't go along with it and, responsible for a lot of what happened there too. One of the key lies that John Bolton was involved in was this lie, I think it would start around 03, that the UK put out, that was Saddam Hussein was attempting to buy yellow cake uranium from the Niger in order to make a weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear bomb or a dirty bomb. Now, I was a kid back at this time, but even I remember this one and how afraid everybody was that Saddam Hussein was going to set off a dirty bomb in the middle of the nearest closest city in America to them, or how he was going to give this weapon to Osama bin Laden and then Osama bin Laden was going to come and deliver it to New York City. The fear here was absolutely insane. And it was just another one of those things where during the Iraq War, you had all these unproven allegations that that Saddam Hussein had all these different kinds of things he was doing wrong. He was allied with Al-Qaeda. He was protecting Al-Qaeda. He had chemical weapons. He was working towards a nuclear bomb. He was going to use a dirty bomb. He was going to give these weapons to terrorists. All these different things that he was alleged to have doing. And none of it ended up being true. And none of it was, a good enough reason to go to war. But when they laid out all these points, everybody, I think, kind of gets the feeling, well, even if he's guilty for a little bit of it, then we need to go to war to protect ourselves. And this is part of the lie that John Bolton's involved in. There's an article by Paul Pillar that I think was published on the American Conservative, but I'll link to it in the show notes page. But he writes about John Bolton during this time, saying that John Bolton would often write his own statements and then try to get intelligence agents to sign off on them, which is supposed to go the other way. That the intelligence agents would write the statements and then give them to John Bolton. But John Bolton, in an attempt to sway things to his position, would attempt to write the statements himself. At one point, I think it was either over Syria or Cuba allegedly having biological weapons programs, which neither of these countries did. Bolton wrote an analysis and tried to get a intel agent analysis to agree with him. That analyst said, nope, not true, not going to do it. So Bolton called him up to his office and apparently berated the guy, red face, screaming at the poor man. And still in that analyst stood up and said, nope, not true, I'm not going to sign off on this. Bolton then attempted to have him removed from his position, I guess to get analysts in there favorable to what John Bolton wanted the report to ultimately end up saying. But this is the kind of man we're dealing with here. Very manipulative, I guess is 100% concrete in his beliefs, even if the evidence doesn't directly reflect it, even if the people around him say no. John Bolton must believe what John Bolton thinks because he's willing to pressure people and threaten to fire people for not listening to the things that he wants the United States to do and to believe. And I guess there's also some allegations that John Bolton has a habit of suppressing any evidence that doesn't go along with his position and just kind of ignoring it and saying it's not there. I think one of the reasons that this is particularly dangerous is John Bolton seems to know this and operate this way and is going to present this information to Trump, somebody who, if you believe, all the reporting that's out there, probably doesn't do a whole lot of reading himself. And so, Trump seems to be putting his trust in the hands of an awfully dishonest person, and somebody, like I said before, has an unencumbered record of advocating for war. Later on in the Iraq war, John Bolton was one of the big people who pushed for attacks against Iran, blaming Iran for troop deaths in the Iraq war. And we were kind of fighting on the Iraqi civil war there. And we were fighting against the Sunnis for the most part on behalf of the Shia. But at the same time, we were somewhat fighting the Shia that we didn't like. And so everybody was fighting everybody, and American troops were being killed by both Sunni and Shia in Iraq. Now, I think almost all the deaths, 4,000, the 4,500-ish, it came at the hands of the Sunni insurgency and not the hands of the Shia. But there was this fake news going around at the time saying that the Shia were using roadside bombs made in Iran in Iraq, killing U.S. soldiers. At one point, this almost led to the United States carrying out strikes against Iran in what would have been called today a limited attack. It's a limited strike. We're not going to, overthrow the whole regime. We're just going to carry out a limited strike. But ultimately, and thankfully, that was decided against going to happen. But, second example, John Bolton being a big time liar on the Iraq stuff. Now, John Bolton in 2015 continued to say that the overthrow of Saddam Hussein was the right move. Now, this is complete insanity to me, right? 2015, we already have Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq, falling to the Islamic State. We have seen at this point how big of a failure and how big the Iraq war blew up in our faces in Iraq, because now we have an Iraqi government that's more friendly with the government of Iran rather than being an enemy of the government of Iran. And we have a massive Sunni insurgency controlling, not just fighting in a large portion of Iraq and Syria, but controlling a large portion of Iraq and Syria, including major cities, Palmyra, Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, Mosul, Tikrit, Fallujah, Ramadi, Tel Afar. All these big cities in both of these countries are all controlled by the Islamic State. And you have John Bolton, who's either unable to connect the dots or simply dishonest in his rhetoric towards the people, saying, nope, overthrowing Saddam Hussein was still a good idea. Now, probably at this very time, you had the Islamic State either dipping people in acid or setting them afire. And then you had another, if not more, hundreds of thousands of civilians that are once killed again in order to get rid of the Islamic State. So obviously a huge problem, blows up in his face, but John Bolton either refuses or can't see it. Of course, what John Bolton will say, though, is that if there was a problem with Iraq, it's that we left too early. And what he's referring to here is that George Bush signed a deal with the Iraqi government that was a status of forces agreement that would allow U.S. troops to remain in Iraq until 2011. When 2011 came around, the situation in Iraq still wasn't to the liking of the people in the United States. Surprise, surprise. And Obama actually did try to keep U.S. troops there longer, but the Iraqi government refused to negotiate a new status of forces agreement. And the reason that the U.S. troops withdrew is because if U.S. troops remained in Iraq post-2011, they would then been subject to Iraqi law. And so let's say U.S. troops go and end up shooting a couple innocent civilians, they could now be facing murder charges in Iraq. But John Bolton would say it was because Obama was weak and didn't do his job and all this other nonsense. And this also ignores the point that the Islamic Caliphate, the Iraqi insurgency, crossed over the border. ISIS, before becoming ISIS, was Al-Qaeda Iraq and started taking territory and conquering Syria, and then stretching and expanding into Iraq. And so obviously John Bolton didn't take too much time when formulating this opinion. He really didn't think it through. And obviously it wasn't the U.S. withdrawal of troops in 2011 that caused ISIS to grow. It was the fact that the United States went and overthrew Saddam in 2003 that John Bolton advocated for back then. All right, moving on next door to Iran. Of course, Iran has become more powerful through all of John Bolton's policies that he's advocated for in the Middle East. Remember, it's Iran's allies in Afghanistan, the Hazaras, that have gained power by the United States war there. Of course, the war in Iraq. As I just explained, Saddam Hussein was an enemy of Iraq. Not only that, then after we overthrew Saddam, we then fought a war for Iran's allies in Iraq and expelled all the Sunnis who were living in the capital city and made it a Shia city. So now we have a Baghdad, Iran-friendly government in Baghdad. Although that influence isn't super prevalent anymore, especially now that ISIS has been defeated. Iraq is a little bit less in the need of help from neighboring states of the United States and is looking to assert a little bit more autonomy, I think. But the overall point here is that every time the U.S. does something in the Middle East that's supposed to be to counter Iran, it ends up making Iran stronger. Similar situation in Syria, where it was the United States creation of a Sunni insurgency in Iraq that eventually bled over the border into Syria, created the Syrian civil war, and eventually you had the rise of the Islamic State. And then Assad having to call on Iran to help him to come and keep the Syrian state from falling to the hands of Sunni jihadists, either ISIS or other al-Nusra style rebels. John Bolton's dreams of regime change in Iran go back a long way. There's been many lies that John Bolton has told over the years about the Iranian nuclear program, often claiming that the Iranians had a secret nuclear weapons program or hiding portions of their nuclear weapons program, or in some way were receiving the IAEA, the UN, and the international community in order to have a nuclear weapons program and eventually build a nuclear weapon. Of course, this has never been true. Gareth Porter is the best on this. If you want to just Google like Gareth Porter, Iran nuclear deal, or not Iran nuclear deal, but Iran nuclear program. And you could get all the information on how this was really and has just been a civilian energy program and not a nuclear weapons program. However, there was a sample taken, and I think it was taken in 2004 by the IAEA that showed that there was 36% enriched uranium, and Iran at that time I think was limited to somewhere under 36% is how enriched their uranium should be. John Bolton sees this, immediately claims that the sky is falling, that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, even though 36% enriched uranium wouldn't necessarily be enough to make a nuclear weapon anyways. However, you have the sky is falling. It turns out that the sample was contaminated by machine equipment that was, I guess, refurbished and given to the Iranians from a different state that didn't enrich their uranium that much, and Iran, in fact, was only enriching their uranium to the allowed levels. However, even in the face of IAEA, which is the international watchdog for nuclear weapons, confirming that nope, it wasn't the Iranians, and we believe, the Iranian story is correct, John Bolton denies that reality. So let's move up to 2015 and the Iran nuclear agreement between the United States, Iran, the Security Council, and Germany. What this deal does is it limits Iran's nuclear energy program, for civilian purposes to power the country, to face even more restrictions than other countries around the world. There's this thing called the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which basically sets standards on countries signed to it. If you're the United States, Russia, China, you're a signatory to it, you already have nuclear weapons. But I think there's some restrictions to your nuclear weapons you agree to, and you also kind of sign a promise that has never been followed, but to one day denuclearize. If you're a country that does not have nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, etc., you sign on to the agreement, and then you're allowed to have a civilian nuclear energies program. And I think you even are able to receive some technologies from other countries. But in exchange, you get watched by the IAEA, which is the International Nuclear Energy Weapons Watchdog Group, to make sure that you're not advancing your nuclear energies program into a nuclear weapons program. So Iran signs on an agreement here, and they say, okay, we're going to agree to additional limits on our nuclear energy program. In exchange, you're going to lift some sanctions, and everybody says, oh good, this works. The IAEA is the international watchdog group tasked with monitoring this agreement, and they have certified every time that Iran is within the agreement. John Bolton's piece. Since he's not in the Trump administration, and I think Trump have floated his name as Secretary of State, but for a couple reasons, possibly his mustache and Rand Paul threatening to filibuster him, doesn't end up as Secretary of State. But on April 27th, 2017, John Bolton felt like he had a relevant opinion for Donald Trump and released something of a memo to Donald Trump on how to get out of the Iran nuclear deal, published in National Review on April 27th, 2017. In that article, John Bolton says that it was Steve Bannon who asked him to put together this plan, I'm not sure if that's true or not. I think this was about the time that Bannon was falling out of favor with Trump, so maybe it was Bannon behind this. Now, within the first paragraph, we have John Bolton explaining why he wants the United States out of the Iran nuclear agreement. He says that it is a threat to American security and growing more serious by the day. Now, both of these claims are absolutely untrue. It's not a threat to American security. As I explained before, this only limits Iran nuclear energy program. And while the deal does have sunsets, some starting in 10 years that would allow Iran to have a more normal looking nuclear energy program, meaning that they would be able to have certain nuclear reactors and enrich uranium to a certain extent, that allows it to have a nuclear energy program that would be comparable with, I would guess, like the Saudis or the Turks or somebody like that. But, it's not like daily that Iran is allowed to enrich their uranium 1% every day until they get to that critical threshold where then they could then make a nuclear weapon and break out of the deal in a couple of years and suddenly have a nuclear weapon. That's not the case. That's not what's going on here at all. Now, Bolton's presented with an interesting problem. One, the IAEA keeps certifying the deal, meaning that Iran is following the nuclear agreement and as written, and this means that Iran has a very limited nuclear energies program. And two, that he wants the United States to leave the deal, even though Iran is following along with the deal. So he goes through the agreement and he finds this thing that says that the president is not supposed to certify the Iran nuclear agreement. And I guess this means that the president should end up putting sanctions back on Iran if it is not in the national security interest of the United States to continue to secure the agreement. Now, Bolton doesn't explain why it's not in the United States national security interest to support the agreement. And in fact, spends most of the rest of the nets of the article explaining how the Trump administration is going to have to put propaganda together against the American people, the people of the Middle East, and the people of Europe to explain why it was good for the United States to withdraw from this deal. So some of the things in the propaganda campaign Bolton would like to push is that it's going to allow the Iranians to enrich uranium. And one of the things Bolton does here is conflates enriching uranium with making nuclear weapons. You have to enrich uranium to a very high level in order to make anything resembling a nuclear weapon out of it. However, enriching uranium a little bit to 20-30% or so allows it to be more efficient nuclear fuel. And so you never have Bolton saying, well, they may be enriching this uranium to make a more efficient energy program. He's saying that, nope, they're using this to make a bomb. And he wants to highlight Iran's bad behavior in the rest of the Middle East and refers to their actions in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Of course, in all three of these countries, it's the actions of the United States and their allies that have increased the Iranian involvement there, as I've already explained with Iraq and Syria. But looking to Lebanon, Lebanese Hezbollah was founded as a resistance to the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Iran didn't have extensive influence in southern Lebanon and didn't command the forces there, as John Bolton would say, prior to the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Hezbollah was a reaction to the occupation. Let's get into North Korea, because one of the big things we have coming up is the Kim-Trump summit. That's a very big deal. John Bolton staunchly against it. Again, just like Iran, longtime proponent of bombing first strike regime change in North Korea. John Bolton has a very negative view of the North Korean people. At one point, he's doing a Fox interview and makes a joke like, how do you know if the North Koreans are lying? And the punchline is when their lips are moving. And so his general opinion of the North Koreans and the North Korean leadership is that they're gonna lie to you and that there's no point in trying to deal with them in the first place, because they're just gonna lie, cheat, and back out of it. Now, I'm sure John Bolton sees absolutely no irony as compared to the Iran nuclear agreement, where the Iranians are remaining in the agreement, but the United States is going to withdraw from that one anyways. It seems that's exactly what we're doing in Iran, but yet this is a condemnable offense for the North Koreans to do, and it means that we can't deal with the North Koreans in the first place. John Bolton authored an article about 3 weeks ago, titled something, The Legal Case for Attacking North Korea, and kind of goes through and explains how if North Korea presents a imminent threat, in his words, to the United States, and then the United States could go ahead and carry out a preemptive attack. While John Bolton more or less concedes that the North Koreans don't present at present imminent threat, the fact that they're working towards one means that we have the right to attack them now. And so the fact that one day a country could somehow be a threat in John Bolton's eyes, means that the United States could go out and bomb them today. Some of the problems that I think John Bolton is going to be for the Kim-Trump meeting is that John Bolton's presenting this scenario that if Trump goes to this meeting, the North Koreans have to denuclearize right away. He's saying that what we need to do is Trump needs to go there and say, hey, I'm sending my planes here in 2 weeks, I'm sending some ships here in 2 weeks, and you're going to load all of your nuclear weapons stuff on it, and we're taking it away, and that's it. Now, obviously, that's pretty unlikely to be the case, and John Bolton refers to this as Libyan-style denuclearization. I have to think that John Bolton's bright enough to know that Kim Jong-un has cited what happened to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya as one of the reasons that he developed nuclear weapons and wants to hold on to his nuclear weapons. He saw that Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons and was then promptly attacked and killed by the United States of America, and his country has been an absolute hellhole and mess since. And so by John Bolton using the phrase Libyan style, I wonder if he thinks, maybe he's sending a warning to Kim Jong-un or something like that and saying that, hey, this deal might not be good for you. But I think it's definitely gonna send up some warning signs for Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans. I broke down this point on a previous episode and I'll link to it in the show notes page. But John Bolton also goes over the whole idea that if Trump has this meeting with Kim Jong-un, it's going to allow Kim Jong-un to show pictures of him and Donald Trump shaking hands, and this is going to be everything that Kim Jong-un needs to remain in power in North Korea forever. So I think the general problem here, though, is he's going to present it to Trump that, hey, the North Koreans need to come beg at your feet that we won't attack them in exchange, that they'll denuclearize immediately and that they should agree to it. And the other option, I think, for John Bolton is going to be time for war. Now, I think the problem is here is that when you're going to do these high level agreements between nations, that the implementation is going to be kind of slow because of the trust and verify method that the United States developed under Reagan, that you kind of take this one step at a time, that the U.S. maybe withholds some war games and in exchange North Korea doesn't do some testing. Oh, so it seems like things are going well. The U.S. will remove 10,000 troops from South Korea. In exchange, maybe North Korea gives up some of its missiles or some of its nukes. Maybe they say, okay, we'll give up, limit our nuclear weapons to 15 or 20 or something in exchange. And you do a slow drawdown. That way, all sides feel like the agreement's being met, that we could trust the other side, and this could go well and be implemented from North Korea's standpoint without the United States waiting until all North Korea's weapons are gone, then immediately invade the next day. And from these sides, the United States, that North Korea doesn't hold on to a nuclear weapon in ICBM and then one day nuke Los Angeles. So John Bolton's a real danger to the potential peace here on the Korean Peninsula. Hopefully he doesn't screw it up too bad and we continue to move in the right direction here. Libya is another country where John Bolton was strongly in favor of Obama's war there. Of course, that's led to a completely failed state. There's 3 competing governments. Terrorists run rampant. The United States just carried out an airstrike against 2 alleged terrorists again, and that seems to be an unending mess. Bolton is a fan of regime change in Syria, and in fact, going back all the way to the days of the Bush administration, John Bolton gave a speech shortly after Bush's Axis of Evil speech, having an addendum saying that the rogue powers of Syria, Cuba, and Libya were all threats to the United States as well. On the Russiagate thing, John Bolton is not good on it. He says that Russia attacked the United States and that we should respond. I think he alleged or suggested, would be a more appropriate word there, carrying out a huge cyber attack against the Russians in response. So, final thing here is, how bad is this? Now, I don't think that John Bolton is going to go out his first day in office and start a war with the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, and the Iranians. This seems unlikely to me. But John Bolton is going to be in the position where he's going to be an important advisor and information source for Donald Trump, and he has shown to be somebody who's willing to give false, misleading, or partially truthful information in order to get the wars that he sees fit. He always seems to advocate for more war, and so it's just going to be more and more steps in the wrong direction here. I think one of the, kind of upsetting things about this is the NSA is an advisory position, and so it doesn't mean that he's going to have to go through a confirmation hearing. This means he can't be blocked like he would if he was going to be Secretary of State, and there's kind of nothing that we could do to prevent this. Unlike with the Pompeo and Haspel nominations, where the Senate will be able to take a stand and possibly prevent them from assuming those roles. Also kind of sucks because, man, if they had confirmation hearings and people could badger John Bolton up there, saying you still support the Iraq war, what's wrong with you? You're clearly an unstable fool. Be nice, but we're not going to get that. So it's bad. It's not the worst thing possible, I guess. I mean, I don't think that this means nuclear war tomorrow or that the Trump and Kim summit can't be successful, but certainly a step in the wrong direction. And as long as John Bolton's holding that position, I think he's going to be whispering things in the ear of Donald Trump that are untrue and are likely to lead America into more war, killing more innocent people overseas, wasting more American money, wasting more American lives, and just overall terrible, evil, stupid policy. That's where I'll wrap up the show for today. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com. I'm on Patreon now. If you want to support the show, help me to grow, get better equipment, stuff like that. Patreon.com/foreignpolicyfocus. I do an episode of a Matt's Boot kind of Contra Crewman style show twice a month there. I'm going to be putting out the second episode for March, hopefully tomorrow. LibertarianInstitute.com. You can find all of my work, my daily news roundups, this show. ImmersionNews.com is my brand new news website. I suggest all of you check that out. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. Twitter at KYAAALE and LibertarianInstitute.org. And Libertarian Union on Facebook.